So here's the deal. I've already given you the background. This is teaching in the modern age. So you can share this with your classmates, and I'm going to put it on YouTube. And what I want to explain is I want to explain why baseball is so important to Americans. But like I told you before, I didn't look up any dates. I'm not giving you the history of baseball. I'm going to tell you about my personal experience with baseball, and I'm going to give you some context so that you understand why it's so important. And I'm going to do it with a personal narrative. If you decide that you want to give your presentation at the end of class, at the end of the course, if you decide that you want to give your presentation and include elements of a personal narrative, like I'm doing right now, that's part of why I'm doing this. I'm modeling personal narrative as a presentation style. You got it? Okay, cool. So, I went to school in Cincinnati, Ohio. This is the logo for the Cincinnati Reds. The Cincinnati Reds are a really important baseball team in the history of American baseball. I'm not sure if it's still the case, but for many years, it was tradition that the first game of the season always took place in Cincinnati. In Cincinnati, I'm not joking, the first day of baseball, all school children in Cincinnati get the day off of school. They don't have to go, it's a little bit like if you grow up in Augsburg and the 8th of August is a holiday, right? You don't have to go see baseball, you don't have to watch baseball, but first day of baseball season, at least when I lived there, school children did not go to school. What? What? Yes. Cincinnati was also the first baseball team to play night baseball. That's another big deal. It's a big deal because baseball has been around since before electrical power. Baseball has been around since before light bulbs. And so baseball was played in the daytime in summer. I went to Cincinnati. I was not a fan of this team because I grew up in a rival team town. And more importantly, the rival team was a team called the Houston Astros. That's their... And you'll notice, we talked earlier about the Lone Star. You'll notice that there's a Lone Star on the logo of the Houston Astros. That's important for later on when we talk more about the Lone Star. But that's beside the point. I digress. This team was in the same division, was in the same group of teams as the Cincinnati Reds. So even though I couldn't go to Chicago, which is where I wanted to go to school, partially because this was the team I really loved, I could go to school in a rival team's town, and in the summertime I could go see baseball games at the rival team's stadium. And you might be asking me, why the hell does any of that matter? Who cares? It's just baseball. If you tell a German, who cares? It's only football, you'll get the same response from me about baseball. However, I understand why Europeans don't get it, because they didn't grow up with it. Talk to an Englishman, talk to an Indian or a Pakistani person, talk to a South African or an Australian or a New Zealander, and tell him it's just cricket. These sports, they have such an important impact on us as a culture. And it's why I'm talking so passionately about baseball, is because in order to understand American culture, you have to understand baseball. We have all sorts of idiomatic phrases that come from baseball. You don't have to like the game. You don't even have to know the rules. But what I want to get across to you in this presentation is why baseball is so important. The reason it came up is that we're talking about American identity, and one of the referenced materials in the book is a movie about baseball called Field of Dreams. So, I go to Cincinnati. It's a relatively famous international music school, and we had a lot of students from all over the world who came to Cincinnati to study music there. A lot of Germans. I had a lot of German classmates, and for some reason we had a few South Africans. 2 South Africans in particular I'm talking about, and they were crazy about the Cincinnati Reds. It's the only time I've seen non-Americans pick up baseball as adults. My girlfriend was Hungarian. Her mother never understood baseball. Her father coached baseball, loved baseball. They were Cubs fans. We used to go to Wrigley Field when I visited. But her mother, who was Hungarian, didn't understand the rules, didn't want to know baseball, thought it was a waste of time, thought it was slow and boring, and all the things that are said to say that baseball is not a real sport, which I won't even begin to argue with because it's so completely preposterous. So, that's why I'm not trying to explain the rules. The rules don't matter, because that's not why baseball is so important. It's a game from the 19th century. It's a game from a time when America was still a primarily agrarian society. Primarily farmers. It's a game that anybody could play if they had a stick and a ball. It's a game that used to be called America's pastime, which I would say it still is. Let me just give you an idea of how baseball used to be enjoyed. There was no television. You couldn't watch television because there was none. And I've heard so many Americans tell the story of their dad in the summertime mowing the lawn, cutting the grass, listening to baseball. Sitting around a campfire, listening to baseball. Talking the next day about the game that happened yesterday. And I already told you this before we started this. I already told you that one of the reasons baseball is so meaningful to me, and one of the reasons why I get choked up, I'm not kidding, I get choked up thinking about it, is because my grandmother and I used to watch it together. And summer days. If the game was on in the daytime, we would watch it in the daytime. Freudian slip. If the game was on at night, we would watch it at night. I vividly remember one time saying to her, "Hey, Nana, what are we going to watch tonight on television?" And she said, "Baseball." And I said, "But there's lots of other things on. We can watch a movie. We can watch a TV show. We can watch something else." And you know what her response to me was? "What's wrong with baseball?" There's a consistency to it. You might say to me it's a long, boring game that lasts anywhere from 3 hours to forever. Why would you want to sit next to somebody in silence? Or maybe chatting about the game, life, whatever else is going on in the world. Why would you want to sit next to somebody and watch that boring thing when you could actually be doing something useful? But summertime for me is baseball. It's one of the few things I really miss about the US. That and Mexican food. And my family. I miss my family. Oh, good. I'm glad I remembered that part. But for me, summertime is baseball. For me, summertime is a picnic. It is a July 4th party. But all of it has baseball as its backdrop. All of it. I can vividly remember specific baseball games when specific things happened. Well, that's normal. When the Boston Red Sox, Bill Buckner, when a ball went through his legs and they didn't go to the World Series in 1986, I know that. Because every baseball fan knows that, and definitely every Boston Red Sox fan knows that. But I can also tell you the weirdest, trivial things that were going on in my life when my team did well, or when, in the 1981 or 86 divisional playoff games, I can tell you what else was going on in my life in relation to that. I can tell you what happened when this team finally went to the World Series and lost in 4 games to the Chicago White Sox, the other team from Chicago. And I can also tell you, and this is how I'm going to wrap this up, I can also tell you that last year there were a lot of fair weather fans for this team. And the Cub fans that I know, myself included, I didn't care at all. I can't say my whole life, because I wasn't a Cubs fan my whole life. But watching the Cubs play, sitting next to my Nana, day after day after day, year after year after year, going to Wrigley Field for the first time and getting my ticket and sending it back to Texas, to my grandmother's. And the next time I'm there, seeing that she saved it and she showed me, here's your ticket from Wrigley Field. How was it? She wanted to hear everything because we'd been watching Wrigley Field on television all those years. And so I don't expect you to really, truly, deeply understand why baseball is so important. There's no way you could. But try to imagine if somebody says, football. And imagine your brother or your dad, or maybe you, who loves football, and their response. And that's how I feel when somebody puts down baseball. Most of the time it's just ignorance. Some of the time they have a really good argument for what's wrong with baseball. Some of the time. But it's one of the few things that I'm so passionate about that I will actually argue with you at length, because I think it's really, really important.